Today we are going to discuss John Donne, an early 17th century poet. He was born between January 24th-ish and June 19th-ish. We're not sure, but we do know that he was born in 1572 and that he died March 31st, 1631. He was born in London, and his entire family was Catholic. However, during his lifetime and his family's lifetime, Protestantism was on the rise. So his family was in religious peril for most of his life. His mother, Elizabeth Heywood Donne, was a lifelong Catholic, and she was even the great niece of the martyred Sir Thomas More. So if you know a lot about history, you know that Sir Thomas More was executed by the king for being Catholic. Also, John Donne's uncle Jasper Heywood, he headed an underground Jesuit mission in England from 1581 to 1583. For the most part, it was almost like a underground railroad, but this particular venture was to try to sneak Catholic priests out of the country so they were not executed. However, poor Jasper was caught. He was imprisoned and then he was exiled. Sadly, John Donne's brother Henry was hiding priests in his dorm room, and he was caught. And once he was caught, they placed him in Newgate Prison. And unfortunately for Henry, at the time, Newgate Prison was overrun with the plague. So Henry contracted the plague and died in prison. Because of this, John Donne had a lifelong fear of being imprisoned and catching the plague, which seems to me would be a pretty fair fear, even if your family member had not been inflicted with both of those things. But that will come into play later in poor John Donne's life. Donne's poetic style. He did not write pastoral poems. Pastoral poems are basically about fields and little pretty sheep and how beautiful the world is. John Donne was not interested in pastoral poems. Also, another thing that John Donne did not do during his time, he didn't make a lot of references to classical mythology. Most poets of the time wrote pastoral poems and referred to classical mythology quite frequently within their poetry. John Donne is a metaphysical poet. Metaphysical poetry was coined by Samuel Johnson. Metaphysical poetry is really cool because what it does is it links two things that you generally would not think belong to one another. And in the contrast of linking two things that do not seem to belong together, it causes the reader to slow down and to really think about the content and the subject matter. Physical poetry itself is less concerned with expressing feeling than with analyzing it. Donne often incorporates a mixture of sonnet forms. He uses the Italian sonnet as well as the Shakespearean/English sonnet. And below I gave you the different sections of the Italian sonnet and then the Shakespeare sonnet and how those two differ. Now, of course, Donne just kind of puts it in a blender and mixes it together. So he's almost, I guess, a free verse poet, but he uses the constraints of the sonnet. So he just kind of mixes it. The Flea is an amazing example of metaphysical poetry because it links two things that you would not think of in order to express his view on this particular subject matter. He's going to use the flea, the little blood-sucking creature, and he's going to compare a flea to actual physical contact, intimacy with this particular woman. He's trying to talk her into a physical relationship, and he's going to use a flea to do this. So let's look at this poem, and I'm going to bring this guy over. Okay, so here is the actual poem, and let's read it together. Mark but this flea, and mark in this, how little that which thou deniest me is. So let's stop here. We learned from Shakespeare's Hamlet that mark means to look. Look at this flea, and look at this. How little that which thou deniest me is. It sucked me first, and now sucks thee. And in this flea our two bloods mingled be. Thou knowest that this cannot be said, a sin, nor shame, nor loss of maidenhead. Yet this enjoys before it woo, and pampered swells with one blood made of two. And this, alas, is more than we would do. So he's talking about the fact that the two of them are joined together in this flea. And he's talking about how harmless it is, how there are no terrible consequences that have came from the mingling of their two selves within this little creature. So he's like, see, look, that flea's kicking it. It's fine. And so he's going to continue. And when he continues, he says, oh, stay, 3 lives in one flea spare. Now, when he says, oh, stay, that means stop, wait, hold up, don't do that. So what we have here, when it says 3 lives in one flea spare, he's telling her to stop and spare the flea. So evidently she's about to squish it. She's going to just squish it dead. So he said, come on, baby, look, this flea's kicking it. It's fine. So, let's mingle together. Everything's fine. And so she goes to smush it. And he says, no, stop. Spare this flea because there are 3 lives in this one flea. And he goes, where we almost, nay, more than married are. So he's like, we are practically married in that little flea, you and I. And he says, this flea, you and I, and this our marriage bed and marriage temple is. So he's explaining that within the little body of the flea, because they have mingled in that flea, that they're married in there. And he says, though parents grudge, and you, we're met. So when he says, though parents grudge, which means the parents say no, and you, we are met. So she's evidently turned him down a great deal. So he's like, you turn me down, your parents don't want it, you don't want it. And he says, but we are together and cloistered in these living walls of jet. So when he says living walls of jet, he's talking about the body of the flea, the little black flea, because jet, of course, is black. So the little black body of the flea. And then he says, though use make you apt to kill me. Though use means habit. She's in the habit of telling him no. Kill me means to turn him down. Let not to that self-murder added be. And sacrilege 3 sins in killing 3. So he's telling her, if you kill this flea, you are killing the flea, you are killing me, and you are killing yourself. You are going to be a self-murderer because we are living in that flea now. And that is sacrilegious to kill yourself. So don't kill the flea. Basically, he's saying, don't kill my hope that you are going to finally give in to me one day. And then the next line is, cruel and sudden hast thou since purpled thy nail in blood of innocence. So what did she do here? She squished it. She was like, ugh, shut your mouth, smush. All right, so she kills it. And now he's sad. He's like, wherein could this flea guilty be, except in that drop which it sucked from thee? So he's saying, you know what? I was willing. The flea was willing. You're the only one who wasn't willing. So why did you punish that why did you punish that little flea? That was a horrible act. And then he continues, yet thou triumphest, and sayest that thou findest not thyself nor me the weaker now. So evidently when she smushed it, he was like, oh my gosh, you just killed us. Then she looks at him and goes, you are fine. Look, you're not hurt. Your arm's not broke. You are fine. I smushed the flea. And he's like, oh, okay. Well, if you are still fine and the flea has been smushed, then he says, 'tis true. Then learn how false fears be. So now he's like, oh, well, if there's nothing to fear, if no harm will come to us, then why don't we just do it? He says, 'tis true, then learn how false fears be, just so much honor when thou yields to me. So he's saying, you are not going to lose honor if you submit to this. He's like, just give in to me. And he says, will waste as this flea's death took life from thee. So he's like, you took the flea's life, nothing happened to us. And he's like, it would be the same with this act, with this physical act of intimacy. You will not lose anything, and you will not lose your honor. So the flea is a great example of metaphysical poetry, because you would not think to use a flea to try to woo a lady, but Donne does it. And it makes you stop and think, what is happening? But that's the point, is to slow you down, make you think about the subject. So the flea is a great example of metaphysical poetry. All right, so let's go back to our Google Doc. All right, so the flea is a great example of metaphysical poetry, but it is also a great example of John Donne as a young man. He was quite a lady slayer. He loved the ladies. He often wrote poetry in the park, and this is how he, courted the ladies, I suppose you could say. However, after a short stint in college, he decided that he wanted to go out in the world and have adventures. So he joined an expedition, and he entered into the service of Sir Thomas Egerton. And this gentleman was the Lord Keeper of England. And John Donne became his high-valued secretary. And so he dealt with some foreign affairs. And he lived with Egerton in his house. Unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, Egerton's brother-in-law, Sir George, sent his daughter Anne to live with Sir Thomas Egerton for a summer in London. Well, Anne and John fell in love, and they snuck off and got married Romeo and Juliet style. This occurred in December of 1601 in a ceremony that was arranged by Donne's friends. So it was all secretive. Now, unfortunately, let's see if I have it here. All right. So, unfortunately for John Donne, he was too chicken to tell Anne's father that they were married. Anne was scheduled to go back home to be separated from John, and she pleaded with him and begged him, please, please, please tell my dad that we are married so we can stay together. And John just wouldn't man up and do it. So she was sent home, and then John decided that he would write her father a letter and tell him that they were married. However, Anne's father lost his business and sent John Donne to prison. He had a lot of political pull, so he sent John Donne to prison. John Donne spent some time in prison. He was, of course, terrified because you remember Henry died from the plague in prison. And so while John Donne was incarcerated, he wrote this poem called The Canonization. And this poem is obviously for Anne's father. So he says, for God's sake, hold your tongue and let me love. Or chide my palsy or my gout, my 5 gray hairs or ruined fortune flout. Now, evidently, Anne's father's talking trash about him all through town, what a horrible person John Donne is. And John Donne is already in a precarious situation. He has lost any political pull. He is no longer going to be able to rise in the ranks. So basically, by marrying Anne, he has ruined his chances of gaining any fortune in life up to this point. So, this poem, he's just telling the father, stop talking about me, being in love with your daughter. If you want to talk about something, talk about my palsy or my gout, which is like some medical conditions, or my 5 gray hairs or my ruined fortune. And then he's going to change it. He's going to sort of change the perspective and talk about him. He's like, with wealth you are stayed, and he's talking about Anne's father, your mind with arts improved, take you a course, get you a place. Observe his honor or his grace. Because Anne's father had direct connections with the king, basically John Donne here is telling him to occupy yourself with other things, or go talk to the king, hang out with the king. You can either hang out with the actual king, or the king's real, or his stamped face. When he says stamped face, he's like, or just go home and count all your money because you're so rich and wealthy. I don't know why you occupy yourself with poor little me who's rotting away in this prison. And then he continues, contemplate what you will approve, so you will let me love. And I like this line because it's kind of sassy. He's like, why don't you just go home and think about what you need to do in order for me to love your daughter, because it's going to happen. It's done. And then he continues, alas, alas, who's injured by my love. And then here at this part, this is what we call a Petrarchan conceit. He says, what merchant ships have my sighs drowned? Who says my tears have overflowed his ground? When did my colds of forward springs remove? When did the heats which my veins feel add one more to the plague I built? Here, a Petrarchan conceit is where lovers who are separated, they either cry themselves to death, they become cold, and then interestingly enough here, the plague I built, back in London during this time, there was this horrible heat wave. And so when people would pass away, they would put on the historical document I don't know what you call it. I can't think of the word, where you record births and deaths and that sort of thing. Well, anyway, they would say that they had a special one for the plague I built, which meant that they died of heat stroke. So he's like, first of all, the tears that I cry being stuck here in prison, they haven't drowned anybody. They haven't overflowed any ground. And then he's like, and the heat, the love, the passion that I feel for her hasn't killed anybody of heat stroke. So he's like, it's really not a big deal. And he continues, soldiers find wars and lawyers find out still. So he's like, look, soldiers going to fight, lawyers going to argue, and litigious men which quarrels move, though she and I do love. So he's like, soldiers are going to fight, lawyers are going to argue cases in court, and I'm a lover, so dude, I'm going to love. And that's what he's saying here. And then he continues, call us what you will, we are made such by love. Call her one, me another fly. Now here, when he says call her one, me another fly, we're tapers too, and at our own cost die. He's saying that John and Anne, he's claiming that they are both moths and they are attracted to the flame, or tapers. Tapers are candles. So he's saying that they're like moths and they're attracted to the flame, and if they fly into the fire, well, that's how they're going to die, in the fire of their love. And then he continues, and we and us find the eagle and the dove. So he's like, oh, we're like eagles and doves. And then he changes his mind here. He goes, no, the phoenix riddle hath more wit. So the phoenix makes more sense by us. We two being one are it. So when the phoenix rises from the ashes, like it burns down into nothing, and then when it rises from the ashes, he's claiming that that's what's happened to John and Anne, that they are not two separate people any longer, that they have burned to ash and they are risen as one creature, like a perfect love. And then he says, so to one neutral thing both sexes fit. We die and rise the same, and prove mysterious by this love. So he's claiming that they are no longer two creatures, but are one, like the great phoenix. John is going hard in this poem. And then he continues, we can die by it, if not live by love. And if unfit for tombs and hearse our legend be, it will be fit for verse. So he's continuing, you know what? He said, we're going to love, and if we die from love, then so be it. However, our love is so great that it is unfit for tombs. The only place that it will fit is in verse. And by this he means the sonnet. And he says, and if no piece of chronicle we prove, we'll build in sonnets pretty rooms, as well a well-wrought urn becomes the greatest ashes as half-acre tombs. And by these hymns all shall approve us canonized for love. So he's like, you know what? You can't hold our love in tombs or hearses. Our love is so big, the only place that it will live is within the walls of a sonnet. And what he means by walls of the sonnet is the actual structure, the ABAB structure. And he's claiming that that is a wall. And within these sonnet forms, their love will be eternal. And it's kind of interesting because it is, because here we are in the 21st century reading a 17th century poetry about Donne's love. And it has survived. So well done, John Donne. You win this round. So, and then he continues. Oh, and also we need to point out the fact that he believes that he is a saint now, that their love is so perfect and so pristine that they are sainted. They have been canonized for this. And then he ends, and thus invoke us, you whom reverend love made one another's hermitage, you to whom love was peace that now is rage, who did the whole world's soul contract and drove into the glasses of your eyes, so made such mirrors and such spies that they did all to you epitomize. Countries, towns, courts beg from above a pattern of your love. So this is a very broad general statement where he's saying, you know what? People are going to look at us and they're going to be like, oh my gosh, your love is so perfect. Please give us the map. Please give us the legend. How do we have a love just like this? And when he says the whole world's soul contract and drove into the glasses of your eye, and when he says so made mirrors because we want to look just like them, or spies, we want to like take a little microscope and get in there and see exactly how they did it. So we too can follow a pattern of their most perfect love. So John Donne, canonization. He wrote this in prison, so he was real sad. But I think it's very poignant. Poignant is a good word. So I know I'm skipping around in this Google Doc a bit, but this is what needs to happen. Okay, so let's go back here. So, eventually, Anne's father decided, you know what, we need to let this guy out of prison. So, he was able to get out of prison. The marriage that had previously been annulled was finally upheld in court and more reconciled with his son-in-law. However, John Donne really couldn't find a lucrative job for a while. And at one point during his middle years, he even wrote anti-Catholic pamphlets. Now, as you'll remember, John Donne's family was Catholic. However, during his college days, he decided to become Protestant. And this was huge on his part because, one, it kept him alive, and two, it also opened him up for opportunities to move up. So it was a political move, but, you know, giving up one's religion is one thing. So we're not really sure. However, we do know that he did take holy orders more than 12 years later in order to become a Protestant minister himself. So, I don't know. Anyway, this is a picture of what's left of the little house that they lived in. And I mean, it was a little house. They lived in a tiny little bit. And it often flooded. So they dealt with a lot of flooding issues as well. It's kind of an interesting little place. Now, as they lived in this tiny little house and they continued to have child after child, by 1616, they had 11 children, and during the birth of the 12th child, Anne More Donne passed away. And John Donne was devastated. And he wrote in one of his divine meditations of 17, he wrote, since she whom I love hath paid her last debt to nature and to hers, and my good is dead, and her soul early into heaven ravished, wholly in heavenly things my mind is set. So at this point, once he loses Anne, his only goal in life is to join her in heaven. And so from this point on, and we see this in his poetry, we see a huge change from the flea trying to get the ladies into these religious poems about God and his struggle with sin. And we think that it has a lot to do with the fact that he wants to be with Anne when he passes away and join her in heaven. And so it's really, really sad. And during her lifetime, while she was still alive, he often lamented the fact that after she gave birth, time and time again, he lamented that he felt like he ruined her, because her health would decline. And so it was really sad. He had a lot of guilt about that. So that's something to know about Donne. So he took holy orders in January 1615, and King James himself, of the King James version of the Bible, by the way, is who pushed him to do this. He encouraged him, he wanted him to take a holy orders, and so he did. And he devoted himself completely and totally to the church. And he was finally elected Dean of St. Paul's in November of 1621. One of the really cool things about John Donne is, for the most part, we have a few of his poems, but we mostly have his sermons. In the British Library, there are a ton of his actual sermons that he presented to his congregation. Over a literary career of some 40 years, Donne moved from skeptical naturalism to a conviction of shaping the presence of the divine spirit in the natural creation. So he moved away from secular poetry into the more divine poetry. I enjoy this particular sculpture of John Donne. I cannot remember what these are called, but generally most holy men have them made when they pass away, except they would be on top of their tomb, so they would be laying down. However, John Donne insisted that his be propped up in order to really represent the fact that he is shooting up to heaven after his death. So John Donne's is one of the only ones that is upright, like a rocket to heaven. I like that. So this is one interesting thing about this particular sculpture that you may find interesting. I do. So hopefully that gives you a little idea, John Donne. Also, the film that I've included, it's a bit long, and I can't remember what that lady from Harry Potter, the actress who reads all the poems, man, she goes hard in that film. But I enjoy that film, and it'll tell you a little more about John Donne. So I hope you enjoy that as well. All right, bye, guys.